Here we go. Alan, so great to connect. Welcome to
Happy-
the show.
Thank you.
Alan, so you're such a legend in this game. I read Million Dollar Consulting many years back. We're so excited for the release of the book Fearless Leadership to come. For the people listening now that may not be familiar with you, could we delve into your backstory a little bit and what's brought you here?
Well, let's see. I entered the training business in the 70s when I left Prudential Insurance. I was a young kid, and I worked for a firm in Princeton, New Jersey for 11 years. I went up to be president of a consulting firm in Providence, Rhode Island, which is why I'm in Rhode Island today. But after 14, 15 months, I was fired. The owner and I hated each other. And, I made two decisions then to save my life. I decided that, one, this was a relationship business, and the idea was to sell yourself and create relationships. And the second was that I would never charge by the hour or day or time unit or by numbers of people in a room or anything like that. I would only charge for value. And those two decisions did save my life. So, the first year I made 67,000 on my own. The next year I made 125 or something. Next year 250 maybe. And that's 1985. And 1991 I wrote Million Dollar Consulting.
And Million Dollar Consulting, I mean, that book has been at the top for a long time. I mean, I heard you make the comparison, in terms of Peter Drucker, and it's hard to dispute there.
Yeah,
I'd love...
pleased to be in that stratosphere, yeah.
Mate, you certainly are. So I'd love to just pull you back. Let's just go back, because there's a lot in there where you just give a little speaker bio about, but there's a lot of gold in there. So when you were sacked, let's talk about that, because these are always usually pits which I love to delve into people's stories. So what happened there?
Well, the company was owned by a guy named W. Clement Stone, who was a big financier here in the U.S. He bailed out Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill had gone bankrupt, Think and Grow Rich, because Napoleon Hill was a fraud. He was a con man. So he went broke. Stone buys him out. He makes his fortune in insurance. And, he owns about 40 companies at this point. And he believed in positive mental attitude. Now, Stone had $450 million to his name when I knew him. And he thought that positive mental attitude got him that. And I said to him, he has the etiology mixed up. Etiology is the science of cause and effect. And I said, the reason you have a positive mental attitude is because you have $450 million, not the other way around. And if you want to give everyone a positive mental attitude, you got to give them all $450 million. Well, he didn't like that. So he fired me in the Admirals Club at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And I called my wife. My wife said, what happened? I said, I got fired. She said, well, we expected that, my wife says. What do you want to do? I said, I'm going out on my own. No moron will ever fire me again. And she said, okay, screw the mortgage, she said. Forget the mortgage, but you better get serious. And I did.
Wow. Am I right in saying that W. Clement Stone, I think that Jack Canfield writes about him in the Success Principles?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all those guys go back forever. I'm just astounded. Stone made his money not through positive mental attitude. In the 20s and 30s, he sold what was called industrial insurance for 2 or 3 pennies a week. And industrial insurance enabled people in factories, very poor people, to get a decent burial and not be buried in a pauper's field, a mass grave. And every week he would walk through these factories, 5, 6 stories, collect 2 or 3 cents from each person, made a fortune. And he founded Consolidated Insurance, got some smart financial guys, and, good for him. But it had nothing to do with a positive mental attitude.
Did you have any contact with him in latter years?
No. After he fired me, that was it. I never saw him again. He was about 82 or 84 then. Had slicked down black dyed hair and a pencil mustache. He was a character. I'll tell you, he had this big caddy limousine from about the 50s. And he used to have me drive it, and he'd sit next to me. But sometimes he'd drive it, and I'd sit in the back. And he was hitting things all the time. And in the glove compartment was a set of stickers. And the stickers were pre-printed. And it would say, and I would check off, mailbox, car, property, or pet has been hit by W. Clement Stone at this address. Please contact him for remuneration, for repayment. And I would stick this on whatever he hit. I'd get back in the back seat.
Wow. So how long did you work with Clement Stone for, W. Clement Stone?
Year and a half.
Were there any particular lessons which you learned from him that carried on throughout your career?
Well, yeah. I mean, the company was all about behavioral predispositions. And I learned psychometric testing, and I learned, what that meant, which made me very cynical about behavioral testing and profiling from companies that don't have validated testing. So you look at Myers-Briggs, you look at DISC, you look at all these horoscopes, because that's what they are. They're not validated instruments, yet companies are using these instead of trying to understand behavior to explain away behavior. What do you think? What can you expect from an INTJ? What can you expect from a high D? It's all crap. So it taught me that. And I went out on my own, so I had some knowledge of that. And then years after I went out on my own, I went and got a PhD in psychology on my own, just because I wanted to get more grounding. But, in the long run, it really didn't matter.
Mm. So after that incident, was there a case of, was it really a case of, do or die for you at that point? Were you really fired up at that point? How were you feeling after, the sacking?
I find that when people are fired, one of two things happen. They either get distraught or they get really angry. And I got really angry. And so I was not down on myself. I was furious. And I did say, no more will ever fire me. I'll never work for anyone again. And I went at it. I called everyone I knew, because I had some background, I had some contact. I called everyone I knew, said, here's what I'm doing. And I was diligent because, like my wife said, screw the mortgage, but you better get serious. And that's what I did. Now, we had very little money in the bank. My kids were in private school, and we had debts, and we didn't have a lot of money. So I went at it.
I know that there's a story which I would love to delve into. Wasn't there a case where you just got sacked from this one job, and you need to raise some money, and you calculate that if you can raise $65,000 by the end of the year, that would be enough to pay for the bills and whatnot. And then you turn to your wife and you're like, okay, it's like I need to rent this limousine to go and meet these partners. Can we delve into that story? I loved hearing this.
Actually, the number was 68,000. You're quite right, 68,000. Huh? And when I got fired, I bought a $2,000 suit, and this is 1980s money, and I flew first class, and I used limos. And my wife said, we have no money, and I said, if I'm showing up in buyers' offices, I'm not going to show up perspired and wrinkled and ragged. And besides, it'll be paid for with just one sale. So I had a proposal in front of Merck Pharmaceuticals. I got on the airplane, flew down, and there were three options, and the third option was 68,000. If I got option 3, we were good for the year. So I walk into the buyer's office. He's sitting, I still remember his name, Del McPherson. And Del's got my proposal, and he puts it down. He says, Alan, look, he shoves it back at me. He says, we want option 3. When can you start? So I said, well, I can start next week. I was going to say I could start right now. I can start next week. Do you mind if I call my office and get messages? He said, no, go ahead. So it's all cubicles. There's no offices. It's all cubicles. So I go into an empty cubicle, and, they can see you. So I called my home number, and my wife says, hello. And I said, I'm checking messages. And she said, how did you do? How did you do? And I said, oh, very well, thank you. And she said, how much? How much? I said, the year we graduated. And she said, grammar school, high school, college? And I said, college. And she said, $68,000. I said, well, thank you for the message. And I hung up.
Oh, wow, I love that story. What was it like when you got home? Was it like champagne waiting for you?
Yeah, I mean, I probably had some wine, with dinner, and we said, okay, if I can do this once, I can do it again. And it also showed me the value of having options, because people love to escalate the value,
Cool.
So, but people say to me, you live in a different world. I understand where everybody is. I've been there myself, and I have a global community. So, I'm working with consultants who are making millions of dollars. I'm also working with consultants just starting their practice. So I know exactly what it's like. I'm very much in touch, and I've been there and done that.
So when you're in that sort of position where you make the gamble to go and get the limousine, how were you personally dealing with that in terms of the stress? Because I imagine that is a stressful position. I mean, you're in a position you've literally got bills to pay. You've made the decision, I'm going to follow this entrepreneurial route. There's no guaranteed paycheck there. It's entirely on you. How do you deal with it?
First of all, you need a strong support system, and my wife was very supportive. And I tell people today, in fact, in this the fourth edition of Getting Started in Consulting, I tell people, you need a support system, whether it's your spouse, your partner, your family, colleagues, you need a support system. So that was one thing. The second thing was that I figured I could always get a job again. And that, I didn't have a terminal illness. You have to have things in perspective. I needed to bring in money. I was working on my own. I was free. Come on. And you have to always keep things in perspective like that. What you do or don't do is not going to change the history of civilization. Uh, I've also worked through with several people in my communities who have gone just about bankrupt. And nobody comes and throws you in debtor's prison. Nobody takes your house away. You have some wiggle room. So if you're fearful, my new book, Fearless Leadership, if you're fearful, fear is like guilt. It masks your talent, and you can't operate as effectively. So you have to do away with the fear, because otherwise you'll never be successful.
When I always love speaking so much to the entrepreneurs that make this leap. Was there a case simply that after that whole sack, and it was just a case of, nope, I am not working for anyone else unless literally like I have to? Was that the case for you?
Right. It was a last resort. I mean, I had kids and a wife, and I had to feed them, and that was a last resort. But I figured, I could certainly last 6 or 8 months before it came to that.
You said that after the sacking, you said that people tend to go one of two ways. It's either they get really angry or they just go down. They just hit a sort of low. What was there about you specifically, about your character, that really got you fired up? And obviously, I mean, we all know the great things which followed afterwards.
Self-esteem. When I was fired, it wasn't a commentary on my self-worth. And if your self-worth is high, but it is also constant. In other words, you're not as high as your last victory, and you're not as low as your last defeat. You're constant. You can withstand anything. So being fired didn't threaten my self-esteem. It didn't tell me I wasn't good at what I do. I thought W. Clement Stone was an idiot. And so I moved on. Just because you have money doesn't mean you're intelligent. So it's really what you think about yourself that matters, not what other people think of you.
I think that this is such a real pivotal point as well, because in the business in which we're in, the people which we speak to, we see a lot of people have a lot of trouble self-promoting themselves. And I'd imagine that that's not necessarily a tactical issue or a problem with their video cameras or their website. I imagine, as you say, that's probably a self-esteem issue.
It is. Consultants have a lot of problem with that. I mean, most professional service providers do. I used to think it was a question of not charging high enough fees. And so, I wrote books on that, value-based fees and so on. Then I realized that there had to be a cause for not charging enough, and the cause was low self-esteem. And so I dealt for many years with esteem, and I wrote books on that subject. But now what I've decided is that one of the problems with esteem is that people are just afraid. And so I've written this book, Fearless Leadership. So I want people to be less afraid. And one of the troubles is, Joe, people don't trust their own judgment. And they're constantly trying to use other people's metrics. What do you think? What do you think? Can I do this? You got to trust your own judgment. It's nice to ask for advice, but at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own actions.
Do you think that you can really build that self-esteem up?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, self-esteem comes from, I call them hyper traits. But for example, a use of language, an unwillingness to tolerate unsolicited feedback. Don't listen to people who you don't ask, because they're in it for themselves, not for you. It's the ability to not see failure as fatal, but as another learning step. And there are 6 or 7 traits like that make you resilient. And once you're resilient, you can get through anything.
The first one which you said, but there is about the unsolicited feedback. Do you mean in the sense that someone could be giving you advice maybe just to feel validated themselves?
Most people who give you advice that you didn't ask for are validating themselves, or they're playing one-up, they're playing gotcha. They're trying to elevate themselves by causing you to be lower. And solicited feedback is much different, because you ask people you trust and whose judgment you trust for advice. But if you listen to unsolicited feedback, you'll just be a ping pong ball.
Yeah. Wow. So is this the topic which is going to be inside the next book, Fearless Leadership? Is this included in there?
Yeah, I heard somebody say, everybody's a guru, and some woman says, listen, the only thing to do with feedback is to listen to it. Crap. You don't listen to feedback you didn't ask for. You're going to spend your day miserable.
Yeah.
I've had speech coaches. I'm making air quotes, right? I've had speech coaches come up to me after I've done a keynote where people are on their feet applauding, telling me they'd like to help me improve my speaking. Get out of my way. It's not that my speaking can't be improved, that I'm perfect, but I don't need to improve it. And I don't certainly need to improve it from somebody I didn't ask.
Yeah. How can we get a balance between wanting to improve and taking good feedback and then not getting drawn into other people's mindless opinions? Like, how can we differentiate between good advice and then their advice, as you said, to validate them?
Only listen to advice you ask for. It's very simple. Don't listen to any advice you didn't ask for. It's that simple. Because the advice you didn't ask for 95% of the time is for the sender. And so that's the line you have to draw. Because today everybody's an expert. Everybody wants to give you advice. But if you walk through the park, you see statues to heroes. You don't see statues to critics.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Do you have any other tactics to raise self-esteem? And I can share one which I've particularly used over the years, if you would like to listen. So I remember reading in Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. Have you read that book?
No, but I know.
Yeah, and in the book, Maxwell Maltz said, and this stuck with me, and I read this about 5 years ago, and he basically said that your self-esteem or your self-image and your habits, they're tied together. So if you change one, so you change your habits, then you would change the other. So I remember applying that and then just doing different things, like, as you said, it could be something simple like exercising more or eating better foods, these things. And I definitely found that they worked in terms of raising my own self-image and my esteem. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think that's pretty true. I mean, we tend to default to the negative. And so you don't get a sale at a given point in time. And instead of saying, on this day, at this time, this particular person didn't buy from me, you say, God, I'm a lousy marketer. And we don't do the reverse. When we get the sale, we don't say, I'm a great marketer. We say, well, I got lucky today with this person. See? And so all that eats away at our self-esteem. So the way to look at self-esteem is that you're not as good as your last victory. You're not as bad as your last defeat. You're who you are. And you've got to abandon perfectionism. Perfectionism kills excellence. And, I've written 60-some odd books because I just sit down, write the book, and send it in to the publisher. I don't go back and say, well, I said there were 7 critical points. Maybe I should have said 9. I never do that. I'm the expert. I'll tell you how many points. And the problem is people rewrite the same sentence 15 times and don't make it any better.
I love that. I love that. I feel as if in the work in which you do, particular in consulting, that negative aspect, if someone wants to get started in consulting, a major part of it really could be, you've got the numbers game, you've got to make more calls, you've got to reach out to more people. And obviously, I mean, we've just covered it a bit in your own personal life. You've gone through some failure. How do you rewire that failure so you're not focusing on the negative, as you just said, but there?
Well, every failure has a learning lesson. If you're not failing, you're not trying. Everybody fails. Edison failed. Washington failed. Everybody fails. So if you're not failing, you're not trying. If people say, I've never failed, they mean either they've never tried anything risky, or they failed and don't know it, or they're lying. It's that simple. So you simply take it in stride. It's going to happen. I think what people need to pay more attention to is the kind of failure work they do. Failure work is work that you do because the first time it didn't work well. The first time it wasn't successful. So, here's a simplistic example. You go to hang something up and it falls on the floor. Well, you have to pick it up and rehang it. That's failure work. But, it happens to all of us. But some of us, failure work is much bigger. And some of us are doing failure work for our clients or doing failure work for our families. And that just eats up all your time. And wealth is discretionary time. Wealth is not money.
I think a lot of people could look at you, Alan, and see these amazing books and the keynote speeches and all this other amazing things which you've done. They could think, wow, but how much failure has this guy gone through? They don't see the process. So how much failure in your life have you had to recover from and do that failure work for?
I don't do a lot of failure work. I'm pretty good the first time, and I try to avoid failure work. But I've had a lot of failures. I mean, my goodness. I've launched courses that nobody wanted to go to. I've submitted book proposals that no publisher wanted to publish. I've had a couple of speeches I wish had gone differently. We all have failures. I don't care. It's part of the human condition, And I remember telling one woman who went up on her lines in a speech, I said, "You did just fine." And she broke down and cried. Another woman I made cry. And I said, "What's wrong with you?" She said, "Fine isn't good enough. I have to be great." Well, if you're going to go through life that way, you're going to have a very difficult life.
Yeah. So in those instances, I mean, what are you telling yourself to just get back up and keep going? It's like a boxer that just keeps getting into the ring type thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was minor. It's minor. I mean, like I said, we're not changing Western civilization here. So I didn't get this piece of business. So the publisher doesn't like the book. So I'll try another piece of business and another publisher. I don't care. I don't take it personally. It's like the mafia. It's just business. I don't take it personally.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's a great place in the conversation now. I'd love to touch on your latest book. This is one I'm very much looking forward to. When's it out now? Is it out at the start of January?
Yeah, I think it's technically released December 29th, but early January. Yeah, the Kindle version's available now. The hard copy comes out then.
How much different is this to your other previous work?
It's very different. I mean, it has a certain relationship to, for example, $1 Million Maverick or Life Storming, the book I wrote with Marshall Goldsmith. But it's very different work. It's not talking about professional services or consultants or anything. It's talking about both people who are entrepreneurs and people in leadership positions. How do you get over the fears that sometimes you don't even realize are haunting you?
So, like, what are some of the fears which could be haunting you?
We walk around subtly afraid of rejection. And even some people in leadership positions are afraid that their subordinates won't like what they're talking about. And we have these fears that we'll be critiqued. And we have these fears, that somebody will find a typo. I love it when somebody says to me, "Alan, there are 7 typos in your book." And I say, "No, go back. There are 12.
I love that. I suppose that would come back to the self-esteem factor as well, right? It would all come back down to, yeah.
People walk around fearing fear. And look, kids are afraid there's a monster under the bed. And so you get a flashlight and you say there's nothing under the bed, right? Next thing they're afraid again. So pretty soon you get older and you're no longer afraid of monsters under the bed. But that doesn't mean there was never a monster under your bed. You just didn't look the night it was there, Might have been. There's this great phrase by Woody Allen. He says, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean no one is following you. So, you get on with your life. And failure is simply part of life. It happens.
Let me ask you, and I wasn't going to take the conversation in this way, but just speaking to you now makes me think. Have you, throughout your career, had to deal with negative self-talk, those voices in your head? Could be, "I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, someone didn't love me, or I got sacked," or anything like this. Have you ever had to deal with those voices?
Never. I've never read a feedback sheet in my life, ever. And when I'm speaking, if I find somebody doing their email or they're not paying attention or they're not laughing at my jokes, I don't care. They're adults. It's all right. I don't care. Just don't disturb the rest of us.
No, I mean in your own head.
Well, no, I'm saying those things don't bother me.
All right.
So I've never thought that I'm not good enough. I've always felt that I'm smart enough to get something done. I'm smart enough to learn new things, so I have to learn new things. And I'm smart enough to bounce back if something goes wrong. So I never burden myself with trying to worry that I'm not good enough. I mean, there's enough people around trying to tell you that. So, no, that has never bothered me. In fact, when I just go back to your earlier questions, when I was fired and was fighting to get business early on, prospects would ask me if I could do X, Y, or Z. And my response was always the same, of course. And I would go out and learn how to do it, or I'd go out and make it up. I had never done it before, but I figured it out, of course.
It's like that, I forget who the quote is, but it could be Elon Musk when he said, it's like, "Someone will ask me to do something and I'll say yes, and then I'll figure out how to do it later on."
Except he doesn't. Elon Musk drives me crazy, except he doesn't.
Right? Have you got a gripe with Elon Musk?
I don't think much of him at all. I think, he wants to send a rocket to Mars and he can't send a Tesla to California. This guy's got problems. He called this guy who showed that his midget submarine was just a publicity stunt to save those kids in Thailand caves. He called the guy a pedophile. He's emotionally unbalanced. He just launched his cyber pickup truck. His this advanced pickup truck, all electric, whatever the hell it is, with break-proof glass. And when they threw iron balls at the glass, it broke.
I saw, yeah.
Muttered, a horrible obscenity. The guy's playing with other people's money. And, unlike Richard Branson, who I admire.
Oh, so it was him. It was him. The quote was attributed to Richard Branson. Yeah.
I think a lot of Richard Branson. I don't think anything of Elon Musk. Tesla will be sold in the next couple of years.
Oh, very interesting. An Alan Weiss prediction on the show.
You heard it here.
Here. So is that what you'd encourage entrepreneurs to do? Someone says, could you do this? Could you do this? Is to say, yeah, and then figure out as you go, that type of mentality.
Yes, providing you have a passion for it. If you have a passion, yes. For example, people would ask me to do things in IT or finance, and I always turn those down because I have absolutely no interest in IT and no interest in finance. So there's no passion there. But if you're talking about organizational improvement, you're talking about improving people's performance, you're talking about organizational structure, strategy. I love all that stuff.
Let me ask you, Alan. So throughout your career, you've obviously done all these amazing different things. You've been at the top for a while. What is it that brings you the most fulfillment in the work in which you do?
Well, I have to answer that with two responses. The first is the tremendous discretionary time it gives me to pursue my interests, to be with my family. I have about a dozen hobbies I'm very interested in, and to be able to pursue my life, I'm very grateful for my profession and what I love. In terms of the profession itself, I'm passionate about helping people on my own terms. And so, I do very little corporate work anymore, but I do some, but it's on my terms. I'm coaching right now one of the most well-known executives in America, who came to me and said, can we do this for a while? But the individuals in my communities around the world, it's very easy to see improvement, and it's very easy to see them advance. And I like this kind of interaction where it's not theoretical. We're talking about seeing the next client, writing the next proposal, delivering the next project.
And something else I'm also thinking, it's like 60 books you've written by this point, isn't it? It's like 60 books?
Yeah, 63 or 4, and they're in 15 languages.
Yeah, so it's clear to me that you must have these outstanding work habits. What are some of the habits or strategies which really allow you to perform at this high of a level for so long?
Well, I'm tempted to say I go for volume and not accuracy, which makes it easy with the books, I'm very organized. I'm highly disciplined, and I'm self-accountable. I don't need someone else to make me accountable. So, for example, before we started today, I've got 6 columns I put in every month, videos, audios, and everything. So I have to organize. And I realized, I had some time, so I wrote one of my major columns for January 1st. And I have a note to do it one of these days. So I'm very organized. I'm self-disciplined, and because my reward is discretionary time. I'm never doing things under the deadline. I'm never doing things in a rush. And so I love being able to do what I want when I want to do it.
Will you ever retire?
Retirement is an artifact. It doesn't make sense anymore. I'll tell you why. I wrote about this in a book called 30 and More. Retirement in the United States was implemented at age 65 in the 1940s when there were 14 people working for every retired person, and the average lifespan was 68. So you retire at 65, you live for 3 years. Today, the average lifespan is 80. And so if you retire at 65, you live for at least 15 more years, and there are only 2.5 people working for every retired person. So first of all, financially, we can't afford that system. Secondly, it's the equivalent of saying, okay, we're not going to put women in the workforce. You're losing all this talent. So all of these people, just because they're above an arbitrary age, can continue to contribute. And if you want to stay alive longer, you have to keep your mind occupied. I work out 3 times a week to keep my body in shape, but I also have to keep my mind working. Right now in Japan, for example, they're bringing back people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s in the financial services area to deal with customers who are now in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who want to deal with contemporaries, And, we have tens of trillions of dollars in the U.S. being transferred because of Reagan's IRA legislation. It's the biggest generational transfer in history. And, somebody my age doesn't want to talk to a 35-year-old financial advisor. And so we need older people who have wisdom in the workforce. And to think that people should stop working at a certain point, they might want to change their work, that's fine. But to stop working, you just sit around to wait to die.
Yeah. It's clear that you've still got that that hunger, even though obviously, I mean, as you just said, you've got that freedom aspect of it essentially. So you clearly don't have to do this. I mean, what's next for Alan Weiss after this?
I don't know. I'm on top of my game. And when I'm not on top of any of my games, I'll leave it. But I'm on top of my game. I'm the best there is at what I do. So I'm going to continue to write. I'll continue to coach. I think I'll put on some high-end events like I do now. My consulting convention next year is in Sydney. I usually do things in Sydney and London in addition to the U.S. I'm putting on some new high-end events. I just finished the consulting college here in Newport. I'm thinking of doing a special castle event in the UK. Maybe, get Downton Abbey or something. Right. And do, 2 or 3 days with special chefs, the whole business. But we'll talk about life and business. Maybe a maximum of 12 people. We'll see what happens. Not
far from me. I'd make sure I'd get myself to that one. I wonder, just following on from, what we've talked about today, I mean, do you think that you could maybe get to 100 books?
Well, let's see. That would be another, let's say, 35, 2 a year. 50, I don't know. But I'm almost at 4 million air miles. Who knows?
Oh, wow. Well, I've just got a couple more questions left, Alan, before we wrap up this. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable conversation. I love connecting. So I just got 4 questions which I ask all of our guests. They're non-specific, so they shouldn't take too long.
Okay.
The first question I've got for you is, you are this obviously amazing author. You've released all these books. I don't think I've ever spoken to a guest with that sort of volume. What are some of the books that you have read that have impacted your life?
Well, I get a lot more from fiction than nonfiction. So I read The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, The Great Gatsby by Fitzgerald, A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens. These are great moralistic tales, and you learn a great deal from them. On the business side, I don't read a lot of business books, but Drucker's books are great. Managing in Turbulent Times, The Effective Executive, those kinds of books. John Gardner on leadership was a book I admired a great deal. So those kinds of things have been very valuable. But I read eclectically. I read about the arts and science and biographies and everything.
Very good, very good. So we always ask our guests, based on your life, based on what you see in the world, could be what we've talked about today, could be the topic of your upcoming book. We always ask, as we are a show that rooted in action taking, we love taking action as quickly as we can. If you had a challenge for us and our audience for things that we could do today, do you have a challenge for us?
Yeah, my challenge would be, think of the greatest value you could bring to others. Think of who your ideal buyer would be for that value, and then figure out how to create the vehicle that gets it there.
Amazing, amazing. What rules in your life have you loved to break, Alan?
Well, I don't forget my original brand was the contrarian. And so, I just don't use other people's metrics. I don't buy into other people's metrics. I establish my own. I think another rule is that, if you can't say anything nice, don't say it. We only grow when some people are honest with us. So if I'm asked, if it's, legitimate feedback and I'm asked, I tell people the truth. And in my coaching programs, I call it tough love, but, that's what you have to do. You can't fool people. And then I think that the whole aspect of pursuing money, I mean, money is fuel. It's a byproduct of success. But what you really have to pursue is your ability to thrive and enjoy life. In other words, there's nothing wrong with happiness as long as you also create it for others.
That's amazing. My last question for you today, Alan, before we get you to leave your social media handles and talk a little bit about your book before we sign off, is let's imagine that maybe in a scenario you do get to this 100 book mark and every person in the world is tuned into the same frequency. Unfortunately, you may not have long left, but you can impart a short but impactful message to our audience, well, not to our audience, to everybody in the world just before your time comes. What would Alan Weiss's message to the world be?
As the horizon gets closer, most people slow down. What you have to do is speed up.
Wow. I like that. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. Alan, where can our Freedom Pack family connect with you?
AlanWeiss.com, AlanWeiss.com. You'll find my blog there and just about everything else you need. There are free videos, audio, text, everything. You'll also find my list of workshops and offerings and books and all that as well. So that's really the best place. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. And I'm on Facebook. And I also have 2 YouTube channels.
Amazing. Everything will be linked below. And Fearless Leadership, what's the release date for it?
Late December. So it'll be available after the first of the year.
Be available. Amazing. So by the time that this comes out, the book will be out by then.
Good.
So yeah. So Alan, amazing to connect with you. I certainly hope it's not the last time. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for the invitation, Joe. I enjoyed it immensely, and continued success to you.
Thank you, Alan. It was such a pleasure.
Take care of yourself.
Thanks, Alan. Goodbye, man.
Bye-bye.